Hi, good day, and welcome to another edition of Vantage Point. I'm your host, Svetlana Marshall. Today we'll be talking about drug abuse here in Guyana. And to discuss that a very important topic, I have in studio with me Mr. Phillip Drayton. He is a drug treatment specialist with the Organization of American States. Mr. Phillip Drayton, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
So oftentimes we hear about cocaine and marijuana, people being placed before the court because of these two illegal drugs. But I know for sure there are other drugs being used that we don't often hear about. What are some of the common drugs used in Guyana?
The common drugs that are used here presently, we have, of course, ecstasy, we have Molly, we have LSD, which are some of the illegal drugs that are being consumed here in our society today.
What is Molly? Tell me a bit about that.
Molly is simply, of course, it's a designer drug, and it be cut from various forms. We can use cocaine, or we can use heroin and mix it too as well, and various other stuff. So persons would cut their drugs differently, but it is in the classification of a stimulant drug, and mostly our youths are consuming it in society today. So we have a serious problem within our educational institutions based on this particular narcotics.
And before we move to the education system, because I know you're doing a lot of work within schools, let's talk about how it affects the individual and then the family.
Yes. Well, there's something that is called the progression to misuse. And the progression to misuse have 7 different stages. And it doesn't matter if you're smoking or you're drinking or you're not smoking or drinking. Every member of society is a part of the progression to misuse. The first aspect is what is considered as exposure. The smallest child that is going to the shop to purchase maybe sweetie or corn curls, etc. Right? Alcohol is being sold at most shops here in Guyana. So that child is being exposed. And from the exposure stage, they will move to something that is considered as experimentation. Experimentation is when an individual tries the drug for the very first time. Right? And from the experimentation aspect, they will move to something that is considered as recreational using. Recreational using is when using is happening, but it is not frequent. You'll maybe take a smoke once a month, or maybe drink beers occasionally, etc. But from the recreational using, we move to something that is called regular using. This is when the individual embraces mood and mind altering substances as a part of his or her lifestyle. In Life Reform's humble opinion, actually 72% of societies at this stage, right, where persons would embrace drugs as a part of the lifestyle, is inseparable. For some reason, the narcotics that is being consuming, or alcohol too as well, defines them in a particular way. And from the 4th stage, which is regular using, persons move on to something that is considered as abuse. Abuse is when we can pinpoint, or we can actually see the manipulative behavior patterns or the addictive personalities that an individual will be portraying simply because of consistent using of mood and mind altering substances. And then from the abuse, they will move to something that is considered as compulsion. And compulsion is when the individual experiences urges and cravings that is very hard to manage or control. And then they will move to the 7th stage of the progression to misuse, which is dependence, where regardless of what is happening on the psychosocial aspect of things, the drug is the main focus in that individual's lives. So from the first stage from exposure to dependence, an individual can take years, or they can take months too as well. It's based on the tolerance level or what they're being exposed to within their lives. So it affects an individual. An individual can be affected in so many levels, but these are the different stages that they go through in regards to using.
What are some of the factors that cause persons to move from, say, experiment or recreation or social use to dependency? They depend on this thing, or they're an abuser.
But persons are what we consider as experience hunting. Of course, persons just want to feel a particular gratification, maybe every single day, or maybe every weekend, or maybe after job, after their work, etc. But most cases that we're handling, we find that there's some type of traumatic experiences, that is happening with individuals, make they will actually pick up and use consistently, and of course reach abuse, and they will transcend in the progression to misuse because of what is happening externally.
And when you analyze the various types of drugs being used here in Guyana, which are the common ones used that causes that effect, that lead people to that dependency, that they must have it, they'll do anything to get that drug?
Well, various individuals have various drug of choices.
But the common ones?
The common one, of course, is alcohol, because alcohol is the drug of choice here in Guyana. And of course, this particular depressant drug is legal, right? And alcohol has been destroying families for centuries, but it is still legal. So the drug of choice here in Guyana presently is alcohol. But based on statistics that we're actually seeing, marijuana is joining this bandwagon, right? So we have alcohol and marijuana that is being used, in the entire society. That, of course, is the largest percent. The largest percentage of narcotics or drugs that is being used is alcohol. So person's drug of onset too as well is alcohol. The first drug that they've tried, of course, is a beer.
I'm sure you would have interviewed and maybe you would have spoken to several persons who maybe reached out for help,
Yes.
or those that families would have contacted you. How the use of these drugs would have affected their families and their ability to contribute positively to society?
Addiction is a family disease. The individual uses, but the entire family is being affected. So once we have a person that hits the abusive stage in respect to the progression to misuse, when the manipulative behavior patterns start happening, when of course they have to find ways and means to use, the persons who are close would actually feel the real effect of drug abuse, because of course stealing would happen. We would start taking things out from the home. We're going to be manipulative. We have to steal, we have to sell our belongings, etc. So when this particular behavior patterns start happening, the family, of course, will feel the real emotional hurt. So it affects the whole entire aspect of the family circle.
And of course you have the health effects as well: heart disease, heart failure,
Definitely.
Stroke, low blood pressure, and so forth. And you said some persons, have you seen persons who would have taken a very short time to reach from stage 1 to stage 7?
Yes, definitely, and that is based on the biopsychosocial aspect of things too as well, because of course once a mother is consuming mood and mind altering substances during pregnancy, of course that child will be born with a predisposition for the use of drugs. It means if that child it turns 11 or 13 and picks up the first beer or the first smoke, you will see how quickly they will transcend through the progressions of misuse, because it's much more of a biological issue, right? And then we'll have to deal with it on the psychological aspect of things too as well, and of course the social norms of that particular individual. So yes, persons can move quickly through the progression to misuse, or individuals can take several years, but it does get progressive.
And you have done work from region 1 to region 10. Which of the regions you see a high prevalence of the abuse of drugs, whether it be it the alcohol or marijuana, cocaine, or the newest stuff that we now hear about, like Molly or ecstasy?
Well, here in Region 4, simply because, of course, it's the capital, right? We have most narcotics that will be found here in Guyana. Of course, we recently had a situation where Candlewood did an interception and we found meth, which is something new here in Guyana. But of course, the different strains of marijuana and cocaine and Molly and ecstasy is present, of course, here in Region 4. But when we look at the outer regions, like the hinterland regions, etc., we find there's a drastic increase in respect to consuming alcohol and cannabis, which is marijuana.
And according to statistics, 70% of our youths here in Guyana believe that it's cool to drink and smoke. And 80% of society does not understand the dangers of addiction. To our viewers listening, what would you say to our young people in particular? Because oftentimes when you go out, you see people smoke, you see them drink. What advice you give them?
You see, the human system is built in a particular way that we don't need external chemicals to be put within the systems to feel gratified in any way. The human system is capable of doing such on its own, right? So what needs to happen is just that a lot of kids out there are just seeking different gratifications. And I'm saying to you that the system can do this of its own. So there's no reason why you would need to put certain external chemicals within the system. For the young persons who are out there consuming mood and mind altering substance, I don't think they recognize the dangers that they're playing with. So my humble suggestion to them is simply just, educate yourself in regards to what mood and mind altering substance actually does to an individual, both short term and long term too as well.
And since we're talking about young people and drugs, oftentimes, well, nowadays, as they would say, you hear people talking about popping pills.
Yes.
This apparently is the new thing. Oh, you're popping pill. What is the situation on the ground? I know before it was considered a rape pill, ecstasy. But you see women now volunteering themselves to use it. What's the situation and what is being done to eliminate or reduce the prevalence and the use of these types of drugs?
A few years ago, we had certain statistics that says that the male is consuming more mood and mind altering substances than females. But today it is not so. Years ago, persons say because men wants to feel macho because of what is needed in society as it relates to being a man was so strenuous that a person would go and consume, or a person wants to boost the self-esteem, etc. But today, females have these same type of issues too as well. They wants to feel instant gratifications, etc. So today it's on a much more level playing field as it relates to what we can do to actually reduce the consumptions of mood and mind altering substances. I can say the most effective tool to combat addiction is education. So that is why one of our outreach, the most important aspect is the 0.5 level of attention, which is awareness, rigorous awareness. So we can let members of society recognize and understand that the dangers they're playing with.
And before we go into the education program, the youngest child or you've seen using or you've heard about using drugs here in Guyana in the school system?
Well, we have certain statistics that states the drug of onset, where the individual tries the drug for the very first time, happens between the 10 to 14 age bracket. But I have clients that the genesis of using starts at the age of 9 years old. Okay? Recent statistics, we have a few cases where persons are consuming at a far younger age. And when these statistics hit my desk, I'm like, how can a 4 or a 5-year-old be consuming mood and mind altering substance? But we recognize and understand that maybe the mother say, here what, give this 4-year-old 2 sip of the beers, it's good for the worms. Or they will put a little touch of alcohol or tussle drill within the milk and we put them to sleep, We're unconscious about the monsters that we are creating, right? And this is simply because certain parents lack simple parental skills, that will point the child in the appropriate direction. So when we do interventions, it must be a holistic approach.
When do you think it's important for somebody to reach out for help? At what stage? Do you wait until you realize that you're an abuser, or maybe you? When would it be best for somebody to reach out for help?
I have clients, persons would reach till at the 7th stage where they already sold everything at home, they're already on the streets, etc. And they would still say that they don't have a problem. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?
That's where the family come in.
That's where the family comes in. Of course, if by chance an individual is consuming or you have, of course, evidence that a person is using or because of behavior patterns, etc., right? Persons can reach out for help. But it is only when it gets really progressive and they've already at the abuse or the compulsion stages when family members would try to reach out to see what can be done, right? Because everyone is on the opinion that, he's only smoking, just one marijuana joint and it's not no drug, it's maybe a herb and, maybe he just take a few beers, he can control himself, etc. But this thing gets really progressive and it's only when it's at the progressive stage persons tends to reach out, and when they do, they reach out in the perspective by saying that here what, this person needs to go to the rehabilitation center. He's smoking or he's drinking too much. It doesn't work that way because there are different levels of attention that can be implemented. So we could decide based on assessment what treatment model we can implement in that individual life so that they can be responsible and productive once again. So there's no genesis, there's no particular stage where we can say to society, when you're seeing this particular sign, you can reach out for assistance. No, from the moment they pick up, we need to see how best we can do an intervention.
And it's important not to encourage our young people to smoke and to drink excessively.
Yes.
The government would have indicated that they would not decriminalize marijuana, and I think some people get away with thinking that government is saying that they're going to decriminalize marijuana. What they're going to do is propose to do is remove jail time for small quantities of marijuana. What is your thought on this move, or this proposal, because it has not reached, a bill was put forward in the parliament, but that was some time ago. What's your take on this?
You see, we have a funny way of handling certain situations, or when we see certain statements being made, persons, of course, find their own reason why they should justify them using. And this particular topic is one of them. When members of society hear decriminalization aspect of things, I've heard many members of society saying that is good, the government is freeing up the weed so that we can smoke, because they're taking decriminalization as legalization aspect of to it. Of course, you said the correct thing. Small quantities of cannabis, I think it's 30 grams or less, once an individual is being found with such, they'll be placed before the court, and there's 3 different options. It's simply, you can of course pay a fine, you can do community service, or of course you can be integrated into a rehabilitation program. So we need to be extremely careful about the message that we're sending our young members of society today, because of this particular aspect, because of persons' misconceptions. I see members walking in the streets and they have a big joint lit in their mouth, and this is how it is. So I don't want to say it has helped promote smoking in a particular way, because persons are saying that our correctional and justice system has a problem, because we're of course incarcerating persons for small quantities of marijuana. Persons need to recognize and understand that consistent cannabis using, of course you can develop psychosis, and of course you can have a dependence to cannabis. And once you hit that 7th stage and addiction becomes a part of your life, it is far more than a 3 years jail sentence. It's a lifelong commitment, is a lifelong sickness.
Well, what do you say to the Rastafarian community who say, well, the use of the herb is for religious purposes?
Well, that is it. I've just, not only the Rastafarian communities, because I've had interactions with the Rastafarian communities where they say, of course, they want to use it for spiritual purposes, and what's not the case. And we need to recognize and understand something, is that the human system cannot differentiate if cannabis is being used for spiritual purposes, for recreational purposes, and these kinds of stuff, or even medicinal purposes. What the human system does, it consumes and shows you consequences. So we need to make cognitive decisions based on the consequences that we are seeing this psychoactive drug is doing in society.
Okay, so I know you mentioned your organization, Life Reform. You're the CEO of that organization, and you've been doing some work in schools along with the Ministry of Education and Health, I assume. Tell me a bit about the program and how impactful it has been so far.
Based on the substance use and misuse and the chaos that we are seeing happening within our educational institutions today, earlier this year I've made a requisition to the Ministry of Education where we're looking to implement what is considered as an SSDEPP, which is a secondary school drug education and prevention program. It's a more systematic approach towards tackling substance use and misuse within our schools. First, we will deal with the PTA aspect of things, because the cohesion with the parents and the schools is very important, because of some of the roots of administration and some of the manipulative ways that persons would find to actually get that instant gratification. Today, especially our youths, certain parents do not know exactly what to do, etc. So we will tackle the parents. We will let them know exactly what is happening, what are some of the things to look for, etc. If there's more intervention that is needed, we will make sure we set up a safe space where that can be executed. When we finish with the PTA aspect of things, we will move then to the teaching staff, specifically the teaching staff only. Because several years ago, a teacher could have called a student, and because of the close contact with a particular child, he or she would recognize and understand that maybe this child consumed alcohol recently because of the smell. Or smell of the tip of the fingers would reveal that this particular child handled marijuana just recently. But today, as we discussed earlier, we have designer drugs that are odorless. Now, what skills do our teachers possess to actually pinpoint manipulative behavior patterns or addictive personality is a question. So we need to empower our teaching staff in a particular way so that they can protect that educational institutions, to some extent. When we finish there, then we will move to the student body. Now, we will deal with the prefects body first. They are more of the police within the school, They can do random search, etc., working along with the teaching staff. So we will empower them with certain specific tools, I should say. And then when we finish that, we will move to the latter aspect of the student body. Now, what will be taught to the first and second formers, the life, the coping, the refusal skills, the attitudes, values, etc., that will be taught to the first and second formers will differ from the third and fourth, and that too will differ from the fifth forms. And this is simply because I've did interventions in particular educational institutions where some first farmers don't even know anything about drugs. They don't need rigorous drug intervention. We need to groom them in a particular way while containing a selective few. It's only when we hit the third and the fourth farmers is when we'll find some type of resistance, because kids will give you justification on why they think it is cool to smoke and drink, Yes.
And I know when we spoke early in the year, you visited some schools.
Yes.
So at what stage you're at? You've spoken to the PTA, or you're spoken to the teachers? What stage you're at?
Yes, well, I've already had interactions with all the headmasters and mistresses within Georgetown District, all the DHMs, etc. So they know exactly what we're looking to do within our educational institutions. And how long will the SSDEPP take to be implemented within our educational institutions? It varies based on the freedom we have on the timetable too as well. Because it won't be we just show up at a particular school and we call all the kids together and we do one big speech and then disappear and don't do follow-ups, etc. No, we are doing this thing class by class, because we need to build that appropriate rapport to find out exactly what are the concerns of our kids in society today, to find out exactly what is the real issue that is troubling, make them picking up and use, etc.
So you've spoken to students already?
Yes, there's 33 schools here in Georgetown, and so far we're only at about 14 schools.
And what are some of your observations? What was it like interacting with some of the students, some of their concerns, and some of their explanations?
We have kids, of course, because of traumatic experiences that is happening at home. We have persons where they would see daddy is abusing mommy, right? They live in particular situations or at homes where both mother and father is consuming cannabis, which is posing a huge risk factor for our kids today. Some persons are there because of experimentation purposes. Some kids have low self-esteem, so to fit into a particular group, they would of course consume cannabis or alcohol, etc. So these are some of the patterns that we find happening within our educational institution, and it's really detrimental, not just to that particular family circle, but to society at large.
I know you said maybe at the fourth and fifth form levels you'll have some sort of resistance, but based on your interactions, do you see them being open to discussing the issue, seeking help, being very responsive to what you're offering?
Yes, definitely. Because of the rapport that we will build, the individual, the one-on-one that we would have on individuals. Yes, persons open up and recognize and understand that maybe they have a problem, right? Or maybe an intervention is needed, but we just don't tackle the students right there. Of course, the family needs to be called into as well and informed, and we need to do a holistic approach towards seeing how best we can rectify a particular situation.
You've spoken a lot on Region 4. When could we see you moving to other regions, life reform and this initiative, drug prevention in schools?
We're looking to do a major outreach starting from January. We recognize and understand that this term that is almost finished was a sports term. Of course, we had school nationals, etc., and teachers were at various activities. So from January, we're looking to do a major countrywide outreach, where we will have appropriate networking with the various Ministry of Public Health, etc., certain psychologists and psychiatrists, to see how best, once we do an intervention, and we find persons who maybe are dual diagnostic, which means they have a mental illness along with an addiction problem or some psychosocial aspect of situations that is bothering them, we can do the necessary referrals. So we're looking to do a major outreach beginning in January.
Okay. And so you've spoken also about the role of parents. what tips you would give them, those who are listening, those who engage in smoking and drinking, who would have exposed their children to smoking and drinking? What advice you would give them?
I want parents to recognize and understand that regardless of where we are presently, as a people, as a nation, as a society, what we must ensure is that the young generation must be at least one step better than us in many ways. And the most fundamental tool to make this a reality, the kids need to have the opportunity to conduct life in a more cognitive way, a more conscious way. And if parents are there smoking and drinking and embracing mood and mind altering substances as a part of their lifestyle, we will put the kids at a disadvantage. In Life Reform's humble opinion, this is a crime against humanity. If by chance the next generation we produce, right, is incapable of handling life on life terms, is incapable of handling thoughts and emotions in a particular way, we must not let this happen.
Okay. And what are some of the major challenges here in Guyana that prevent us from really tackling drug abuse? Go ahead.
Like, as I mentioned to you, education is something very vital, in respect to persons that is consuming mood and mind altering substances. But one of the things that I have observed is that most members of society lack the appropriate coping life and refusal skills to deal with certain external situations in society. If by chance you're at a job and someone gets you upset, etc., or wife is at home and you and her have a misunderstanding, or vice versa, you would leave home and go to a bar. Something happens at work, you want to take a break and go out and smoke. So persons lack the basic fundamental coping life and refusal skills to simply deal with certain situations in a more cognitive way. And this is even missing from our educational perspective too as well. It's not implemented within our educational system too as well. So I think this is one of the main reasons why persons, because they can't deal and cope with a particular situations, they will look to have a temporary escape, which in the reality they're creating a permanent problem, which is just using.
But do you think the Guyana police force and Kanu, they're doing enough to prevent prevent the sale of these illegal drugs and from them being brought into Guyana?
Yes, the police and the different organizations that deals with narcotics apprehension and prosecution is doing all that they can. I need you guys to recognize and understand that if by chance there's a particular area that is selling narcotics don't come in an individual home. They don't jump in their mouth. The narcotics don't light itself. Individuals must go and pursue these things. An individual must go and purchase these things. So it is a friction that is happening with the individual make they want to go out there and pick up certain mood and mind altering substances that would bring a different experience in their life.
Yeah, but exposure is another thing. If it's not available in Guyana, then there'll be no reason for anybody to maybe attempt to use it.
Our clients.
And I'm talking about the newer illicit drugs, so like Molly, you would have mentioned Molly and ecstasy and so forth. Before it was not so prevalent. You find maybe when I was going to school, once in a while you hear people talking about these things, but like today it's, we popping pills. You go to the clubs, you hear people talk about popping pills, and that's the sad reality here in Guyana. How could we maybe reverse that?
Well, we cannot reverse persons or in regards to narcotics here in Guyana. I think the Kanu, along with the Guyana police force and different various organizations, is doing the best they can to deal with certain situations like this. But we need not just a change, but a transformation in regards to persons' thinking process. I think this, of course, empowering family members and communities would actually decrease the use of certain mood and mind altering substances, because each community, most communities that Life Reform visited, right, there's a particular drug block in most communities. There's a particular drug block that is sectioned in somewhere there. But persons still have to go and purchase these different things. So if we can do a transformation in regards to the thinking process of the individual, make them recognize and understand that, hey, this thing is detrimental to not just your life, but your family members too as well. I think this will have a huge impact in respect to the decrease of persons who are consuming countrywide.
Okay, let's talk now about your training overseas. I know you did some training here in Guyana, but recently you participated in an international training program with some 35 or 34 other Guyanese. Tell me about that and how that training would have is helping you to execute your mandate.
All right, definitely. I mean, the drug treatment course with the Organization of American States is something that is vital. Of course, it's a collaborative effort in respect to the Organizations of American States and the University of the West Indies too as well. There were 35 different personnel that was being selected to actually go and do this particular type of training. And of course, they are all here in Guyana, but of course in various regions. So we can see the type of knowledge that we have to do the type of intervention that is necessary. It's a countrywide approach and not just, channel in one particular region. So based on the type of interventions that we are trained to do, I think we will have a decrease in respect to substance use and even helping persons who are already at the dependent stage. So probably within the next year and a half, I think we will start seeing a decrease based on the type of rigorous work that we will have to do to make sure that persons stay as responsible and productive members of society.
And importantly, persons who may be looking at this program or has a relative who may be engaged in abuse of drugs would like to reach out to you or any organization, how could they make contact with you?
Well, they can send us an email, of course, at lifereform.savinglives@gmail.com. They can call our office at 225-2708.
Okay, and as we wrap up today's program, what word of advice you would give? I know you would have given a lot of advice earlier, but maybe to the younger population, because, and I say younger, and I've been emphasizing on our younger population, because it's so sad when you read about school children engaged in the use of drugs. For me, it's, what advice you give to young people, again, to parents who are listening? It's important to hit home to them. So speak directly to them.
Well, all I would like to say, definitely, it's regardless of whatever resource we have here presently in Guyana, right? The most vital and fundamental, the most privileged resource that we will have here is our people, right? And mental health or mental wellness is vital for a nation to actually transcend and move forward together. If by chance we embrace mood and mind altering substances as a part of Guyanese well-being, it may take us decades to recover, right? Our younger generation, as I mentioned earlier to you, will be at risk, and economic development will be a far harder task to tackle, right? So all I'm saying is that persons need to embrace the aspect of mental wellness, to recognize and understand that they can conduct life more cognitively, more consciously. Any situations that they face, they have the appropriate decision-making skills and problem-solving skills and empathic capabilities, etc., that they would help themselves to become responsible and productive, and holistically will help Guyana to move forward. So put down the mood and the mind-altering substances. There's no reason to go up to cloud 9 with a psychoactive drug. It is detrimental to life and it's detrimental to society.
So you've heard him, and I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We dealt with a very important topic, drug abuse, and to our young people listening, our students, school children, please desist from using alcohol, desist from using illegal drugs. We want you to contribute positively to our society, and so you could also reach out to Life Reform if you have a relative who may be engaged or maybe abusing drugs or alcohol. You would like to get some help. You could reach out to Mr. Phillip Drayton. He is willing to help, and I've seen him in the fields working all the way in Maikoni. Keep up the good work. We need more and more persons going into schools, going into communities, and not only schools but communities, and reaching out to our people, offering much needed help. So definitely keep up the good work. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Vantage Point. Do join us tomorrow, same place, same time, for another edition. I've been your host, Svetlana Marshall. Thanks for joining us.